Yes, Cookie, I got vaccinated yesterday and early voted for Kamala Harris, but no, I'm not a trans gay person now. Don't listen to Fox News. Oh, hey everybody. Welcome to Shales Book Club, where we don't talk about Fight Club because I didn't read Fight Club. We've got 2 books to review this month, and before we get to that, however, of course, we have this month's beverage of the month. And it's called, my shoulder's a little ginger, that COVID booster is really destroying my shoulder right now, but it feels good. We're clearly Canadian is the beverage of the month. It was in our fridge, and clearly Canadian because in a few months that's where I might be moving if this country is as shitty as I think it is. Clearly Canadian. All right, so 2 books this month. Not the 2 books I promised. One of the books I promised last month, if you're keeping up, and then a different book, because I didn't get to the other book. Let me explain. The first book is not one I promised. It's called Live from New York by Tom Shales, who I believe passed away this year or last year, so R.I.P., and James Andrew Miller. Now, this book is 20 years old, but it's sort of, at least for the first 26, 27 years of SNL, it's sort of the definitive history of the show, because it's basically told, 95% of the book is basically quotations from writers, guests, hosts, actors, producers, executives, and obviously Lorne Michaels. And I read this because I knew I wanted to see the movie Saturday Night, the great movie that came out recently about the first episode of Saturday Night Live. I highly recommend it. But I said, let me read this first. I've had this book for like over a decade. It's like many books that just sit on my shelf. And like a non-scholar, once the movie's coming out, that motivates me to go, better read that book now. I really liked it, okay? And many of you may have already read it, or it's like I said, it's not an up-to-date history because it basically takes us through like 2002. But what I really liked about it was it took a little bit to get into, and then it just really flowed. You get to hear the different kind of experiences of people. But what I think hit me the most, you're getting quotes from lots of different people, but obviously people like Phil Hartman and Chris Farley are 2 of the most notable people, Gilda Radner, who did not contribute because they were deceased by the time this book was written. But I think what I actually appreciated about it was a lot of people, including Chris Rock, my stand-up hero, talking about how working on SNL, I always wanted to be on SNL as like an impersonator. That was, I'm sure I'm one of a million people with the dream of that. It's not going to happen. I can't even sell 20 tickets in Pittsburgh, so I don't know that anybody in the industry is beating down my door to get me on SNL at 45 years old. Though when I'm not tired looking, I'm told I look like a mature 43. But it was the description by him and several other people where they said, SNL is the best comedy education you can get, because it's almost like it sounds almost like it's like an ER rotation for doctors or something like that, where you're getting writing experience, deadline experience, like intense work situations, but where it's all there's a sometimes unhealthy but also healthy competition in terms of sketch writing, getting your stuff seen, and forming partnerships with people who you vibe with well and create well with. And I felt like at this point in my life where I've kind of, not in a depressing way, given up on some of my dreams, that resonated with me much more than being Chevy Chase or John Belushi or Phil Hartman. It was more like, wow, working on that show is like getting a PhD in comedy writing and TV experience and things like that. And I think that's the thing that I took away from the book most, was like a new respect. I watch SNL and I criticize it plenty, but I also praise it when I think it's good. Ariana Grande episode recently, fantastic. But it made me kind of respect the process almost as a comedy educational institution, even beyond just what they've put out and the fact that it is an institution. Like I said, I've criticized it a lot. I think there are times when I go, what the hell are they doing? Or has it become stale? And I did think reading about the first season in this book and then seeing the Saturday Night movie, it made me realize that the guy Tim Robinson, who I think his show is funny, I don't love it the way some people do, but I will give him credit. He was on SNL for 1 season, like in the 2010s, and then he's had a few seasons of this very quirky sketch comedy show on Netflix. And I gotta say, when you read about what they envisioned for the first season and the vibe of the first season, I would say Tim Robinson is the closest thing to the original spirit of SNL. And this isn't me saying I love Tim Robinson, but I think he could argue that he is like holding the mantle to the spirit of SNL better than the current SNL is, which is a little bit more of a corporate show now, because it is, you can only be the renegade and the trailblazer for so long until you're an institution, and then somebody needs to rebel against you, whether it's In Living Color or Tim Robinson, that create a different sort of more aggressive or alternative view of sketch comedy. But as a comedy fan, as a sketch comedy fan, this is obviously, many of you may have already read this, but I would say this is, this just feels like kind of an essential book in the canon of comedy. So yeah, I liked it, and it's once I got into the flow of it, it read very quickly. So yeah, Live from New York. Okay, there's your first book. Now the second book is a book I did promise you, because as I mentioned before, the New York Times came out with their list of the 100 best books of the 21st century so far. And I realized I had read like 11 of them, but I owned like 7 more of them that I had bought trying to look important and impressive, and then never read them. So I said, time to bump those up the list so people start looking at me going, oh wow, this is a learned man. And in fact, while I was reading this book in Chicago, and it takes place in Chicago, a woman on the train with her husband, if you read my recap blog, which I know you didn't, said to me, how are you liking that book? I go, so far so good, I'm about halfway through. She goes, oh, I think it's a beautiful book. So great. And we were just chatting, and then she left with her husband, but I feel like it was a real Bridges of Madison County moment for her. She was like, do I leave with this tall, strapping reader, or do I stay with this old shoe that I've been with for decades? And she decided at the end to do what Meryl Streep did in the movie. I never read the book Bridges of Madison County. I didn't watch the movie, but I've seen the ending. And she stayed. Anyway, the point is, the book is The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai Pfeiffer. Just kidding, Makkai. My cinematographer right now is shaking her head because she loves puns, but not when I do them. And it was a National Book Award finalist, and I remember I bought it in like probably 2019 in paperback, because it was one of the 10 best books of 2018 by the New York Times. So I said, well, let me scoop that up. And I'll tell you what, the reason I scooped it up is because it sounded interesting, but the only reason I read it now is because it made that list. And I said, I gotta start getting through these important books. But it was about AIDS in the 1980s. And this will sound morbid maybe, but I think my background, my mom, as a brief history. Let me just give you my family history very briefly. My father came here from Haiti, and I don't think anything more needs to be elaborated about what condition Haiti is in, though my father was relatively well off in Haiti with his family. But my mom, just to give you, my mom's mother, my mom's grandfather and grandmother came here from Ireland, and her mom was born in Buffalo, New York, so not an immigrant, an anchor baby. But then her father, who had been, I think my mom said, either a professor or something in Ireland, something a little more highbrow, was working in a factory and died. And in a factory accident. So then my mother's grandmother stayed in America and cleaned houses while her daughter went back to be raised in Ireland, because she couldn't care for her daughter as a single mom immigrant in America. My mom's mother, my grandmother, eventually came back to America, met my grandfather, who was fresh off the boat from Ireland. And then they had 3 kids, and then my mom's mother died when my mom was 9 during gallbladder surgery, which is rather routine, but at the time, an infection, etc. And so my mom, and then my mom's older sister died when my mom was 21. So my mom's life is one long, bitter struggle, to be honest. And I think something in me has been raised to appreciate and admire people who fight through things and deal with adversity. And in modern times, we have a lot of problems in the world, but you'd be very hard pressed to find a community in recent history that's been dealt a rougher hand in America than gay men. And I think of friends of mine who are in their 50s, and you think of like, the analogy I've made in conversation is this idea that it's almost like war. Like, what would you call someone who was treated poorly yelled at, and had dozens of friends potentially die of a disease that seemed to be, almost cosmically targeting them. I feel like the only people who could relate to that would be soldiers. It's obviously a different kind of fear and violence, but so I think the way I was raised, I always just had this sort of admiration for gay men who came through that crucible. That's, no, I don't condone their lifestyle. I feel they're all going to hell. Let me get that out of the way. But beyond that, I'm kidding. But you get what I'm saying about sort of admiring and respecting and being a little bit in awe of going through that kind of a struggle. So when I saw this book, what it was about, and that it was so well received, I said, this would be interesting. This might be an interesting read. Now, it's fiction. It's a novel, but I got to say, it's an incredible book because HIV sort of stalks some of the characters in this book. It's just about a group of friends, a community in Chicago, and there's this idea. I think the author in the afterword talks about how basically New York and San Francisco were these sort of iconic pillars of the gay community and the struggle for gay rights, whereas Chicago's kind of this smaller maybe community that didn't get as much attention. So she's writing about this, and you start to just the characters are so well written. You just feel like you're immersed in this world. For any of you out there who are a little conservative, don't worry, there's not a lot of sex talk in the book. I mean, there's sexual talk, but it's not like Ryan Murphy wrote this book, if you know what I mean, okay? The Menendez brothers, were they killers or gay porn stars? You decide, Ryan Murphy. So this book is, of course, there's talk of sex and things like that, but it's not, if that's something that maybe would have you going I don't know if I want to read a gay man romance novel. It's not like that. But one of the characters in the book makes an analogy at some point in the second half of the book to war. Like she had lost friends to World War I. World War I, right? Because the book takes place in the 80s and then the 2010s. It's kind of split. But I, of course, wanting to always be right and validated, I thought, exactly, this old lady gets it as she's making this analogy. That's the analogy I've made. And so there is a lot of sadness in this book. There's a lot of hope and sadness, and it's just, I would almost compare this book, this is high praise, and I don't mean it completely, because 6 Feet Under to me is still as much as I love The Wire and things like that, 6 Feet Under for me is still the single best drama series I've ever watched. And it is not one single episode, though the finale is the greatest finale in TV history, but it's Thank You for Cracking Your Ankles, cinematographer. It's the cumulative effect of that show, of getting to know the characters, and then the ending that sort of brings it to this, you've got to immerse yourself in the whole show to really feel it. This book kind of felt like that. I really enjoyed it. You really feel like you're getting to know these characters. I think the author, Rebecca Makkai Pfeiffer, really, it's one of those books where, just the same way I felt when I read The Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe, where I said, I wish I could write like this. And I want to write like this, and I don't know if I could. Probably can't, but in terms of just at the end feeling like she's done such a dive into the psychology of characters, where you really feel like you're getting an authentic expression of these characters. Like you really feel like they're real people, and you're really feeling the turmoil within them, the anguish, the different. It really is an excellent book. So I'm glad I read it. I'm glad, the Times had it high on their list of the top 100 books of the 21st century, because, my snobby need to be relevant kicked in. And I said, you're bumped to the top of the list, great believer. So, yeah, if that sounds at all interesting to you, I really, really thought this was a good book. So The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. Those are your 2 books this month for whatever they're worth, both paperback, so I just spit. I don't know if you could see that in 4K, but they're both paperback, so not too expensive. But here's a book, next month's book, and by next month I might mean December, because this one's a doozy. It's a paperback, but it might as well be the entire collection of Encyclopedia Britannica. I am reading the acclaimed the legendary biography, one of the great books of the 20th century, which I think just celebrated its 50th anniversary, the Pulitzer Prize winning The Power Broker, Robert Moses and the Fall of New York by Robert A. Caro. Now, I've got a few trips going on this month, okay, folks? But this is an 1,162-page book. They're big pages, but the print is not so big either. So this is going to be a big lift. I'm probably going to get physically stronger carrying this back and forth with me, but this is what I'm reading. Okay, so I'm going to try to get it to you by November 30th. Unlikely. So I might throw in like a short book in between to get you a November book review, and then this. So this is either November or December's book review. But I'm sure many of you have read it and will tell me, oh, I love The Power Broker. I hope I hate it, to be honest. I hope to be a contrarian. I hope it's as bad as Book Review 3. Everybody go back to Book Review 3 if you forget. That was that fantasy book where a leopard was like raping a man or something. It was bad. Fantasy is just not my genre. Sorry, except Lord of the Rings. So, Power Broker, book reviews. Who knows what will happen in the next week? Maybe books will be banned by the time this show comes back. But everybody get out there and vote, unless you're voting for Trump, and then stay home and maybe drink a gallon of fentanyl. So thank you for watching. Thank you for being Patreon subscribers. And remember, books, they're like documentaries for smart people.